Thank you for joining me for another campus conversation, this time on assessment and research designs in the study of post-traumatic growth. Now, assessing post-traumatic growth in trauma psychology, there's really one measure that is typically used. PTGI is the acronym standing for the Post-Traumatic Growth Inventory. This has at least 5 different factors from factor analysis that have been identified. So different dimensions of post-traumatic growth type experiences. One relates to the relationships we have with others after the traumatic event. An example would be, I have a greater sense of closeness with others after the trauma. The second dimension is about personal strength. For example, I have a greater feeling of self-reliance after the trauma. The third dimension, new possibilities. I'm able to do better things with my life after the trauma. The fourth dimension, appreciation of life. I can better appreciate each day after the trauma. Finally, the fifth dimension, spiritual change. I have a stronger religious faith, perhaps, after the trauma. Amazing that the birds have come to listen to this talk on post-traumatic growth and its assessment. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. The famous quote by Nietzsche. And this was also the title borrowed by Martin Seligman in his research back in 2011, which actually showed that the number of traumatic events a person had experienced, endorsements on a traumatic stress inventory, higher numbers were actually associated with more reported strengths. Seligman and colleagues surveyed 1,700 people. They asked about the traumatic events they had experienced, but they also asked about various strengths. Those who had experienced at least one trauma had reported more intense strengths and a higher well-being than those that had experienced no trauma. The number of strengths actually increased with the number of traumatic events the person had experienced. But this would be the experience of resilience, of course. Post-traumatic growth, again, implies struggle, and there tends to be some occurrence of negative outcomes, such as PTSD and other mental health concerns, together with the positive outcomes measured by the post-traumatic growth inventory that we've described. Let's, however, consider some of the research designs typically employed in the study of post-traumatic growth. For one, they tend to be retrospective in nature, and there are certain problems with the retrospective study. Retrospective designs evaluate a person's current standing on a dimension, that is, what I'm experiencing right now. For example, closeness to other people. We recall our previous standing on that same dimension. Before this moment, how close did I feel with people compared to now? Before the trauma compared to after the trauma. We assess the degree of change. How do I feel right now, and how much do I think there's a difference from how I felt before? Determine how much of that change can be attributed to the traumatic event as well. So there are a number of different considerations that the person goes through to determine their level of post-traumatic growth in the retrospective design. Comparably, we could have a prospective study, a longitudinal study, which we assess certain strengths, character strengths, at one time point. Then we sort of hope that some people will experience some kind of trauma, and then we reassess at a future date. Now we can notice possible changes that have occurred, even in the direction of increased character strengths. This would then be an instance of post-traumatic growth. So to summarize then, we've considered the way to assess post-traumatic growth retrospectively, as is typically the case in the research, or prospectively, really an improved design that way. We've also considered different dimensions, 5 in fact, of post-traumatic growth. It's not just a single dimension, but there are different aspects, different ways in which we may grow following the trauma. In other talks, we've emphasized resilience is really just a return to baseline. What I'm experiencing after the trauma is no different than what I was experiencing before. But post-traumatic growth is implying an improvement, an increase in positive function. There are various dimensions, 5 we described, and we considered how these are measured in research, retrospectively or prospectively. Thanks again for joining me in this campus conversation on the assessment and the research designs used in the study of post-traumatic growth.